good morning. I do want to thank you for being here with us this morning. I am well aware that it is very cold. This is, for me, being from Arkansas, the coldest I have ever been. I got to play, I got to play with my new snow thrower the other day, and it was fun while it lasted, and I'm good. We can go ahead and skip forward now. But our lesson this morning comes from Matthew chapter 6. Looking at Matthew chapter 6 and looking at here this idea of going from selfish to selfless. And like the text that Brother Andrew read a moment ago in Matthew chapter 6, those events, those actions that take place there in Matthew chapter 6, no doubt, talk about not only a person who is doing things for the wrong reason, as we've talked about before, but it's also a very selfish person. If you go back and look there for just a moment in Matthew chapter 6, 1 through 4, it gives all the reasons why those individuals did the things that they did. And it was for selfish reasons, right? When you think of selfishness, what do you think about? And I beg you, do not look at your spouse when we're talking about selfishness or selfish things we may do, because they may remind you of something that you have done. But when you think about selfishness, what do you think about? Do you think about certain actions? Do you think about certain traits of individuals? Maybe of yourself, right? I mean, if we're honest, that's where we should start with our examination, is with ourselves. What about selflessness? So you were to say, what is a selfless person? What comes to your mind? We probably think of a person who does certain things, right? Well, let's begin this morning by defining our terms, if you will. As we look at we've already looked at Matthew. We look at defining our terms here. We look at this idea of selfishness, defined as a concern for one's own welfare or advantage at the expense of or in disregard of others, excessive interest in oneself. Have you ever been guilty of being selfish? I'll be the first to say, absolutely I have. I've done things that are selfish. Sometimes, probably often more than not, we can say we have done things that are selfish that we didn't realize how selfish they were, or that they were selfish until later. But regardless, we probably all have done selfish things that we have done just for ourselves and really didn't care what anyone else thought about it. We look at this definition here. This definition says a concern for one's own welfare, which sounds, well, that sounds right? You want to look out for yourself. Or advantage at the expense of or in disregard of others. That's really what we're looking at, right? Advantage at the expense of or in disregard of others. Doing things to gain advantage without regard to anyone else. We can most definitely do that very easily, can't we? But let's also define selflessness. Selflessness, having or showing great concern for other people and little or no concern for yourself. When I was looking for a way to define this, one that kept coming up was you have no regard for self, which to me sounds crazy because everybody has regard to yourself to some degree, right? You care about your own well-being. You're not going to do things that are going to allow yourself to get hurt physically or whatever it may be. You're not going to do that on purpose. So I like this definition better. I think it fits better. Having or showing great concern for other people and little or no concern for yourself. I think of it as being that we realize that we are not the most important person on the planet. That we are not even the most important person in this building, right? When you think about selflessness, we realize that God, of course, as we go through this, is the one who has to take priority in our lives. Any other, anything else above on the top of our priority ladder shows that we are being selfish, that our priorities are not correct. Let's look at some dangers of being selfish. Some dangers of being selfish. This little screen isn't on, but I'm going to try to turn it on. We'll see. Dangers of being selfish. The first one here is arguments. Arguments. Now, you may be shocked, but people do sometimes have arguments, don't they? I know that's shocking, but it is, right? Always, you think about why selfishness can bring about arguments. Well, someone who always wants their own way and mock others when they don't get it, I've seen that. Have you ever seen that? Maybe you've been guilty of that. You want things a certain way. If you don't get it, you just make fun of the other person or persons, right? What about how selfishness often leads to abuse in relationships? And abuse can take many forms, not just the physical, but it can come in the form of mental things as well, can it? Abuse comes in all shapes and sizes and different forms. And selfishness can so often lead to various types of abuse. Look with me at Philippians chapter 2 in verse 14. It tells us here, do all things without murmurings and disputings. You know, not everything in life is worth fighting about. Not everything in life is worth getting upset about. There are things I'm going to question from time to time in our home or whatever it may be in the church. But there are some things that they're really not that important. We're not talking about doctrinal things, obviously. But some things for some people can lead to an argument. It doesn't matter what it is. You ever met someone who can argue about anything? You know, depending on the context, that's not really a good thing, right? Someone who can debate a topic that you want to discuss, that's good. But someone who will argue at a drop of a hat and they enjoy to do it about the smallest thing, that's not good, is it? I think if we're honest, and I include myself on all these things, so don't think I'm trying to stand up here and say I'm an unselfish person, because I'm not. When I see cake coming out, I want to be the first person in line, okay? But being unselfish is something we have to work at every single day, isn't it? We look at Philippians 2 and verse 14, he says, do all things without murmurings and complaining, or disputings. Complaining is the New King James version of it. And he says there, do all things. There's a difference between asking questions and wanting to understand what we're doing and between arguing. What about the idea that selfishness can kill joy? Selfishness can kill joy. How does it do that? By being critical of everything. You ever go out on the town to do something and you start finding things you don't like, maybe at your restaurant that you're going to, maybe at the place of entertainment you've chosen to go to, and you start making comments about it? And all of a sudden those around you are smiling or having fun. All of a sudden they're not smiling anymore because all they're hearing is you complain. Sometimes I'll admit I'm that guy. This food's taking way too long, right? That's how it starts. But selfishness can go much deeper than just complaining about a long food, wait or whatever it may be. It kills joy by being overly critical of everything. It finds flaws in anything. Look at Proverbs chapter 17 and verse 22. He says here, a merry heart doth good like a medicine, but a broken spirit drieth the bones. You've heard me talk about this verse before. But notice here this first part, a merry heart doth good like medicine. To be a joyful person is not only good for you, but it's good for those who are around you. We're always going to find things that we don't like, that we wish were a little bit different when we go out and do various events, whatever it may be. Things we wish were a little bit better, a little bit different. But every time we go to do certain things or we spend time with friends or family, if we're always complaining and we always start picking things apart, the joy won't just be taken out of you, it'll be taken out of those who are around you. Look with me next at Philippians chapter 4 and verse 4. And that's not on the screen, so let's just open our Bibles. Philippians chapter 4 and verse 4. Philippians 4 and verse 4 tells us, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. Rejoice in the Lord. I'm sure not many of us went outside and went, great, it's negative whatever degrees. Great, it's so much snow that we don't get to go to school today or work today. We probably didn't rejoice in that. But there's always something we can rejoice about, right? Something we can find joy in and take pleasure in, regardless of whatever is going on. We need to be those who try to avoid selfishness because it can be a robber and stealer of joy. Selfishness rejects getting better. It rejects getting better. What we mean by that is this person rejects any criticism. Anytime someone comes up to you and say, well, have you thought about this? Or maybe we could do this differently. And we lash out and say, no, this is what we're doing. offering no explanation why. You know, criticism is going to happen all the time in life, isn't it? If you have a job as an employee, you have been criticized at some point in your career, right? But is it always something that we should cast off and ignore? No. Criticism helps us to get better in our life. The only way we get better is we consider when others try to help us, who honestly and sincerely try to help us get better, and we actually swallow our pride and say, you know what? Maybe they're right. Maybe I can do this differently, or act differently, or speak differently, whatever it may be. But a selfish person rejects getting better. This person may lash out at those who give honest criticism. Look with me at Ecclesiastes chapter 7 and verse 5. He says, "It is better to hear the rebuke of the wise than for a man to hear the song of fools." Anybody can give a compliment, but a wise person can give a sincere and honest and loving criticism. You know, I enjoy, just like anyone else, when someone says something nice. I do appreciate it. But shouldn't we also appreciate when those who come to us lovingly with a sincere criticism about maybe something we said, maybe a class, a lesson, or maybe just something in our own lives, some way we've been acting, and they offer some criticism. Not out of meanness, because I believe we can also offer criticism in a way that's not right. Unfair criticism. But also at the same time, a selfish person will reject fair criticism because they don't believe they need to get better. Raise your hand if you are a perfect person. Exactly, right? We all have things we want to improve on, whether it be with our relationships with our spouse, with our friends, with our coworkers, whatever it may be, with the Lord, things that we can improve upon. In Ecclesiastes 7 and verse 5, it says, "It is better to hear the rebuke of the wise." The rebuke of the wise, the correction of the wise. That is much more helpful, isn't it, than to hear someone always saying, "Hey, good job," or "You're doing great," even though those persons are, according to verse 5, are fools. Compliments are good, but rebukes are definitely things that can help build us and make us better. But a selfish person will reject getting better. A selfish person will make excuses for lack of faith. Here we go. They'll make excuses for their lack of faith. Selfishness makes excuses for not giving their life to God as they should. And I'm encouraged, and I understand completely of those who stayed home today because of fear of safety. But I'm encouraged that with the weather that we had, I see so many people who are still here this morning. To me, that's a great encouragement. And it also shows where your heart is. It doesn't mean those who are not here don't have their heart in the right place, because I don't like driving in weather that's not, less than perfect, to say the least. But we see that desire, and the Lord sees that desire too, doesn't he? But there are those today who would make excuses for their unfaithfulness. There are those who would sit out at a game that's negative, 8, 7 degrees, right? Whatever it is. Watching Andy Reid's disgusting mustache get frozen. Who can do those types of things. But how many people, I wonder today, who attend a congregation somewhere, who went to that game, I wonder how many of them today decided to stay home and make an excuse for it. I'm not saying all of them did, but I guarantee you some did. I think about all the things in life we make a priority, and we make it a priority over God. Selfishness will not allow us to put God first. In Romans chapter 12, looking at verse 1, it says, "I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice." A living sacrifice, right? That's that continually being a sacrifice to God, making sacrifices in your life for God as you live on this earth. Holy, acceptable to God, unto God, which is your reasonable service. I love that phrase, reasonable service, because there are some today who believe, being faithful to God, that God just asks too much. It's unreasonable to be faithful to God, to sacrifice things, to give certain things up in life. The Apostle Paul, who would spend most of his Christian life, probably a good portion of it at least, in prison, said it was not unreasonable to be a living sacrifice to God. But the selfish person will. The selfish person will say that I am never wrong. That's the title of that point. That's not what I'm saying. But that's what the selfish person will say, right? That I'm never wrong. They may never actually say those words, but you never hear them actually say, back up and say, you know what? Yeah, I was wrong on that. Or, yeah, that wasn't completely correct. They don't say those kinds of things. Simply said, they never admit error, or they never admit they make mistakes, and by doing so, they are selfish. Look at Malachi chapter 3. In Malachi chapter 3, we have the context of the Lord calling out these individuals, and he would give even specific things, and their response was, in what way? We find that a lot in Malachi chapter 3. And we find here in Malachi 3 verse 13, the Bible says, your words have been stout against me, saith the Lord. Yet you say, what have we spoken so much against thee? They're denying they've done anything wrong. Why? Because, at least in part, they are selfish people. Now we can say in the context they're also spiritually blind. They're also wanting to worship God however they please. They weren't giving him as they should, which all of them, in many ways, lead back to selfishness, doesn't it? Why does a person decide to stop putting God first? Because they want to do other things in their life, at least in part because they're selfish. A selfish person cannot logically and honestly say that God is the most important person in their life. You can't do that. You can do it, you can say it, but it won't be correct. What about living selflessly? Living selflessly. Now, this is not a long list. None of these things are meant to be comprehensive or complete, and so just consider with me these points. The first one is look for positives instead of negatives. You know, I can't work because of the snow. I can't work because of the ice. We get to spend time with our families, though, don't we? You know, we get to enjoy one another's company. We get to watch my wife and daughter yesterday go walking out into the negative degree weather in the snow and laugh and smile when they did it. I didn't do it, but they did. You know, you get to enjoy that time together, right? We can grumble and complain, but if we're honest, and I'm very good at grumbling and complaining at times, but has it ever changed anything? I can go outside and say, I wish it would stop snowing. It doesn't work. We can say, I wish that spring would arrive early. It doesn't work. So what do we have to do? We have to make the best of any situation we find ourselves in. Living selflessly is we will try and strive always to be a better listener. We will always strive to be a better listener. And as a husband and as a father, I can say I'm always trying to be better at this, because sometimes if we're not careful, we can be very bad at this, right? Sometimes I would say most of the time it's not intentional, and sometimes we just have so much going on we forget it. But I don't want to make excuses, because we can always be better listeners, can't we? We want to be those who listen and take time to listen, and to do that many times we need to talk less, don't we? James chapter 1 and verse 19 says, "Wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear." He goes on to talk about being slow to speak, right? We learn a lot more about each other when we stop and we actually listen. We'll, as husbands, stay out of trouble probably a lot more if we listen a little bit better. We will be better fathers when we listen to our children, and know we'll have a better chance of knowing what's going on when we listen a little bit better, don't we? And again, I say all these things, I put myself right there in the middle of it as well, to try to be a better listener, try to be better at all these things, right? That's what it's about, being better, getting better. Sometimes it can be difficult to listen as well as we should, but those around you will no doubt appreciate it, right? When you remember things. You know, I know when my wife's birthday is. I know when our anniversary is. But I know why I know that, because her birthday is the day after mine. I know when our anniversary is because it's just a few days after that. It's September 4th, in case you want to know the date. I know what it is. But I say that because why? Because those are important dates. We listen. We strive to be a better listener each and every day, whether we are a spouse, a child of our parents, being in their home, whatever it may be. We strive to be better listeners. We strive to be better each and every day in all aspects of our life. We are okay doing things others enjoy. Doing things others enjoy. I know the guys appreciate this, but we're not always excited when our wife says, hey, let's go to Hobby Lobby, right? Now, I enjoy Hobby Lobby over some other stores that she likes to go to, but I'm going to pick one that'd be more likely. If I was wise, 19 years ago, I would have bought stock in Hobby Lobby. But anyway, is that the top thing on our list when a game is on? Probably not. Is that the top thing on our list when we think, well, I really need to do this or this or this? No. But we need to be, in order to be selfless, we need to be okay doing things that aren't our favorite things to do. Because friends, especially as a husband, I can tell you, I'm sure your wife has grown to be okay doing things that you like to do, they don't like to do. There's not a lot of wives who enjoy sitting down for hours and hearing football on the television, right? They probably don't really care for all that. Well, they let you do that anyway, right? Because it's what you enjoy. We need to do the same thing. As husbands, as sons and daughters, and as children of God, we need to be those who are selfless people. We should not have the attitude of, as I heard one person say, well, I've already done that or seen that, so I don't want to do that. Let's do something else. I've heard somebody say that before. Someone else want to do something they've never experienced, and their response was, I've already done that. Let's do something else. Doesn't sound very selfless, does it? We should, as selfless people and striving to be selfless people, we should practice the golden rule. Practice the golden rule. Matthew chapter 7 and verse 12, right? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, right? That's the idea. We treat others as you would want to be treated. Again, sometimes that's hard because people's personalities sometimes, frustrate us, right? You ever go into a Walmart and come out in a bad mood? All the time. For me, it's a little annoying to go in there. But I try to be friendly when someone talks to me, but in Walmart most of the time they won't talk to you anyway, so you're okay. But when they do, I try to be friendly, right? Because I want them to treat me as I would, I want to treat them as they would treat me, right? We want to do unto others as we would have them, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So we think about living selflessly. Look for positives instead of negatives. Be a better listener. Be okay doing things others enjoy. Practice the golden rule. What are some other lessons for us today? We have to realize, when we think about some lessons for us today, we have to realize that selfishness is dangerous. In a spiritual sense, in other ways as well, it's very dangerous. If we are a selfish person and we don't recognize and we don't work to do better, we don't apologize for times when we are selfish, whatever it may be. There may be lapses of judgment when we are very selfish. But we don't apologize for those things and correct those things and strive to be better. Work to be better like a selfless person does. It can cause a lot of pain, can't it? It can cause a lot of pain in our families, cause a lot of pain in the workplace, it can cause pain among your friends. Have you ever had a friend who, whenever you hung out, you did whatever it is they wanted to do? And that's all you ever did? That's a selfish person, isn't it? But also in a spiritual sense, if we are selfish, it will be, like I've already said, impossible to put God first. You cannot always be thinking about me, myself, and I, and then say, oh, well, God is number one, but me, myself, and I want to do this, this, and this is what we're going to do. That's a selfish person. Selfishness can be enough to keep a person out of heaven. Because why? Because when God is not first, He's not a priority, you're not be faithful to Him, right? It's hard to say you're faithful to God when He's not the most important person in your life. You can't be faithful to God. A selfish person may have a difficult time putting God first because they are, worried about themselves, right? Remember we talked about earlier, we defined selfishness. They take advantage at the expense of or in disregard of others. Excessive interest in oneself, right? They're going to put God first? I don't see it. That's why we have to make sure we work to be selfless people. There are going to be times we do things that may be selfish. We can work to be better. Selfishness puts God in the wrong place on man's priority list. You know, if God is anywhere but the top, then he's in the wrong place, isn't he? I've heard people try to make fun of this idea of the priority list or that priority ladder, and they say, well, that's kind of outdated. No, that's not outdated if it calls you out on your life. If God isn't on the very top, it's not outdated. You just don't like what the result is, right? You know, we hear people all the time say, well, the Bible is, it is outdated. You know, so many things that don't apply to us today, so many things that cannot teach us today. The world hasn't changed that much. You look at the Bible, look at people today, we just do the same old sins by different names sometimes, don't we? We commit murder and we call it abortion. We talk about, pride, and we talk about love is love, which is what? Well, sin is what the Bible says, right? Sin is sin. Doesn't matter what you think about it. God's already spoken on it. You think about selfishness, we have to remember God never asked us, as one brother said one time, God never asked us our opinion. He told us his law, revealed his law to us. We are to follow it. You ever had your parents ask for your opinion on what you should or shouldn't do? Probably not with a straight face, right? Because it's not up to you. You're not the standard. See, for right and wrong today, we are not the standard either. God is. When it comes to what is selfish and what isn't, we're not the standard either. God is. He tells us what our standard and what our standards are and what is selfish and what is not. What is being selfless and what is not. Selflessness is the exact opposite. Selflessness is pleasing to God. Doesn't mean we never do things for ourselves. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about, though, is that we look out for others. We put God as the top person in our life, and we also look out for others, right? You don't think the Bible teaches that? What do you think the phrase, my brother's keeper, means? Look out for others, right? That's what he's talking about. You can't get out of the book of Genesis, right? Cain used that in a mocking way. My brother's keeper? Yeah, you are. You're to look out for one another. And we think about this idea of being selfless. We put God first, he being our priority. We look out for others. And yes, we look out for ourselves as well. Nothing wrong with taking care of self. But there is something wrong with being selfish. Selflessness means you are not the most important person in your life. If you ask someone besides God, who's the most important person in your life, they're probably going to list their family, right? Their family. What's wrong with that? God, family. That's how it should be. But sometimes, when family acts up, we say, it's family and then God, right? Family gets in trouble because we're selfish. We say, well, family can't be wrong, so they're more important. The first person who realizes that God is not first in their life is God. He's the first person to know when he's not in the front seat. We used to see those stickers, and I saw a shirt somebody wore a couple of weeks ago that had this on there, and I was kind of amazed. I hadn't seen this so long. But it said, God is my captain, or my co-captain, right? Co-pilot. No, he's not. He's either in charge or he's not. There's no co-anything, right? Again, God doesn't ask us our opinion. He is the most important person in our life. Selflessness means you care about others, and most importantly, you care about God. You care about others and you care about God. God being most important. Because friends, make no mistake, God cares about others too. Those you're worried about, God cares about them. Those various situations you're concerned about, God knows about it. He's concerned about it. God is concerned with individuals who are hurting, individuals who are in sin, because God wants everyone to have heaven as their home. And to live in such a way, to behave in such a way where you put others first and God is just somewhere down the list is a slap in the face to God. It's a slap in the face to God. You think about your own worship this morning. When it comes time to sing praises to God, are you singing or is your mouth just moving? Sometimes we're too worried about the sound that comes out, aren't we? God just wants to hear you sing, doesn't he? See, God wants us to put him first. And all the little things we worry about so many times, God's not concerned about those things. How am I going to sound? God doesn't care. You may care, God doesn't. Putting God first means we actually care about doing what is pleasing to God. As we close this morning, we must realize that selfishness can be recognized and changes can be made if the person is unselfish enough to do so. They can be changed. We can change. If we have things in our life we can do better, we need to root out areas of selfishness. Think about things in the past we've done that we need to apologize for, whatever it may be. If we're unselfish enough, we can make those necessary steps, right? We can change. We don't have to be the same. One of the worst things I ever heard from a meeting one time among men was, well, we've already done this. We've done it this way for so long, we're not going to change now. You know what they were talking about? They weren't talking about the color of the carpet. They were talking about church discipline. We never called anyone out before or reproached anyone about their sin before. We're not going to do it now. Selfishness, isn't it? Among other things. We're not going to change. See, selfishness refuses to change. Selflessness does not mean we're going to be perfect. It doesn't mean we're not going to make mistakes, but we are striving always to be more of a selfless person. Selflessness means you care about others, and most importantly, you care, we've already said, you care about God. Are you selfish? And if you are you willing to change? You think about that for a moment. No one's asking you to volunteer. No one's telling you to raise your hand. But think about your daily life. Are there things in your life you can change where you can be less of a selfish person? Be a better person for those around you. Be a better person for your family. Be a better person for your friends. And most importantly, a better person for God and for the Lord's church. This morning, think about these things. We'd be glad to assist you and encourage you any way that we can. That's good. We stand and sing the song that's been selected.